Next on the Critical Eye, mind games. As a communications tool, some say the mind has powers that we are unaware of. Hello, I'm William B. Davis. In this hour of the Critical Eye, we'll look at the theory of mental messaging, which advocates say takes many forms that include remote viewing, subliminal communication, repressed memory.
In the unconscious mind. The processes are known as subliminal because they occur at levels below ordinary consciousness. Subliminal messaging has been used in advertising, sales, and self-help audio tapes. But does it work? The idea behind subliminal messaging is simple yet complicated. With images or sounds, the hidden persuader sends messages, hoping to alter the public's subconscious. The intended result is behavioral change, brought on by the way we acquire information.
We process information on multiple levels at once. And in fact, only a small amount of the information that we are processing at any given moment reaches conscious awareness. Subliminal messages are any messages that are presented below the level of conscious awareness. There's a number of ways that scientists do this. They may present a visual image very quickly, on the order perhaps of 1/100th of a second, even faster. Or they may present an auditory stimulus at a very low volume, and sometimes overlaid with a louder tone or sound that would mask the subliminal sound.
Dr. Bornstein and other scientists say humans are constantly absorbing information.
You may be driving home from work on a very familiar route. You can be holding a conversation with the person next to you and realize you've driven 20 miles, you don't remember a bit of it. We process a lot of information without being aware that we're processing it at the time. Subliminal perception is simply a laboratory situation where you monopolize on our ability to process information consciously and unconsciously at the same time.
Scientists argue that subliminal messaging mirrors subconscious memory.
There is a dispute as to whether or not subliminal perception really occurs. And there's a distinction between what we sometimes do based on cues that we're not aware of, on the one hand, and the notion of subliminal messages.
Researcher James Alcock teaches psychology at York University in Toronto. He says information acquired subconsciously may not exert subliminal influence.
We may respond to all sorts of cues we're not aware of. You may see a sign with a soft drink ad on it, and half an hour later say, oh, I'm thirsty, I think I'll buy that, and not say, oh yeah, the sign made me do it. You may not be aware that you saw the sign. But there's nothing subliminal about that. It's just that you didn't make a connection with seeing the sign and buying the product.
Hey, have you heard about the crazy new way to send a message today? It's flashed on a screen, too quick to see, but still you get it subliminally.
Subliminal advertising entered the American lexicon in 1957 with the emergence of a popular urban legend that remains to this day. The story goes that a publicist had single frames of film inserted into the evening's feature at a New Jersey movie house. Flashed at the audience, the messages read, thirsty, drink Coke. Hungry, eat popcorn.
So the legend has it, popcorn and Coke sales just skyrocketed. Turns out that was a hoax. Never happened. The data were made up. But the public became very interested and very alarmed by this notion that we may be manipulated by messages we're unaware of. And then science took another look.
Bornstein's research indicates that flashing images for 1/100th of a second can build affinity and alter the visual preferences of clinical subjects. In a controlled setting, these results can be replicated 6 times out of 10.
I think what that tells us is 2 things. It is a scientifically reliable finding. It is statistically significant. The odds that that's due to chance are infinitesimal. It is a measurable effect. It's a reliable effect.
The subliminal perception that people are interested in is something that has this tremendous effect. It causes a person to buy something or believe something or change his or her behavior. So there's really not much to be gained from these very, very tiny effects that are found in the laboratory.
Subliminal messaging is also attempted through sound. The Progressive Awareness Group sells self-help audio tapes laced with subliminal messages. They believe that with the help of subliminal messaging, listeners can absorb knowledge subconsciously.
Attention is a budget. It's analogous to any budget. I have a limited amount of attention. If I begin to spread that budget across too many areas, I lose the ability to attend, to focus per se. One of the more exciting areas about subliminal information processing is that it affords an opportunity for each and all of us to use time that might otherwise go dormant learning. Isn't that we're going to maybe learn a new subject all the time, but by understanding this budget of attention, we can understand that it's not necessary to process information.
There's nothing in the way of a psychological theory or principle that could explain or account for why or how such messages could influence our behavior. I mean, for all practical intents and purposes, they might as well be absent because they're sort of washed out by the supraliminal material that they're embedded in.
Clients around the world buy Taylor's tapes, which deliver messages designed to educate and change behavior. Users play the tapes while asleep. The messages are intended to enter the subconscious mind through repetition. Taylor claims his tapes can end bad habits, stimulate learning, and improve attitude.
The power of subliminal is it bypasses that critical sentry that has the ability to argue back. It enters my stream of consciousness directly. It becomes, therefore, a part of my thoughts. If we can prime that inner talk long enough that an individual begins to change how they're interacting with others, act in reliance on it, then their behavior or their perception of the world will begin to change. And as that changes, we can build upon that to make longer changes.
Scientists say subliminal message tapes work no better than auditory placebos.
But it's very easy to test these tapes, and people have done such studies where you find, in fact, they have no effect compared to a blank tape or a tape that doesn't have a message in it. Whether you wear a banana skin on your head or listen to a subliminal tape, neither one of those are going to cure you of smoking in and of themselves. And so the only danger is that you won't use other methods that are more appropriate.
And the scientific evidence suggests that these products are useless. So not only is there no therapeutic benefit from them, but if you scrutinize these subliminal tapes, there's no evidence that there's any subliminal signal on them in the first place.
Skeptics point to a notorious court case involving heavy metal band Judas Priest. In 1990, 2 Nevada teens attempted suicide, resulting in 1 death. The boys' parents cast blame on the band for embedding subliminal messages in a recording.
The alleged message was the phrase, "do it." Do it. Do it. Of course, "do it" doesn't mean much much unless there's some antecedent to which the do-it is referring. And in this case, what the do-it was supposedly referring to was the disposition to commit suicide. So the plaintiffs were in a tricky situation because they had to acknowledge that the kids were suicidal to begin with, and that the subliminal phrase "do it" tipped them over the edge.
A court absolved Judas Priest of any responsibility for the boy's suicidal behavior. The verdict stated the band had not created a subliminally violent tune. A position echoed even by some who study subliminal messaging.
You can get an effect in the laboratory under extraordinary artificial conditions whereby words that are presented, that is, single words presented so quickly that the viewer has no phenomenological experience of having read the word. With the right measures in place, we can demonstrate that indeed the word got in. That is, it was perceived at some level. I must say, though, that the nature of the effect is rather fleeting, and these words don't constitute messages or some sort of directive to engage in a behavior. I mean, the effect is simply an effusion of semantic associates to an individual word.
You are never going to be influenced by things that you don't know are influencing you, but you don't have to worry about messages that you can't see or can't hear. They're not going to get through and affect your brain in some way that makes you do things without awareness of what caused it.
So I guess if there's any message for the public, it's that there are more important things to worry about than subliminal messages.
I believe in subliminal messages.
I don't really believe in it. You can manipulate an individual's desires.
That's why I bought these sunglasses today. But I don't think I'm going to go buy a $50,000 car.
And I think in the big scheme of things, maybe it's just old-fashioned advertising.
Science hasn't shown one example in which mental messaging has delivered what it promised. For now, all the technique does is give advertisers a bad name. Memory is the blueprint of our life experience. But what does it mean when we bury memories deep beneath our conscious mind? The theory of repressed memory maintains that those among us who endure traumas too awful to bear shove memories of those experiences deep into the subconscious. These recollections lurk like mental landmines, inflicting trauma later in life.
The parts I've always remembered are of being unhappy, of being depressed, of being scared. The only time really feeling comfortable was when I was in my room alone with the door shut.
Neil Brick believes he was lucky to survive a childhood full of abuse that he blocked from his memory for decades. Once he tapped into those apparent memories, they flooded his mind and body.
I'd be feeling the pain of the memory and so on, you know, or sometimes the pain came first. And it was just unbelievable. Out of nowhere, these things just started coming into my head.
Neil's memories told him members of his own family subjected him to ritual abuse. He says he locked these experiences deep in his mind until he was able to take control of his life. Once he left his hometown and changed careers, details of horrible events invaded his conscious mind.
Feelings came up very strongly, and memories started coming out of the blue, and I didn't know what to make of them. I just wrote them down, all these memories, these things I was remembering of severe abuse. You know, it made sense to me right away. I said, oh, this is why I've had such a miserable life up till now. This is why I was in so much pain.
When people are remembering things that are pretty extreme, pretty bizarre, let's say 10 years of being victimized in a satanic ritual where there's no corroboration, you have to ask where did this come from? And one of the places that it may have come from is suggestive influences.
The fact is, it's too traumatic to live with these memories. You simply must forget in order to cope with life.
Walker says she has worked with many law enforcement agencies. Interviewing hundreds of victims led her to champion the cause of repressed and recovered memory. She likens repressed memory to an out-of-body experience.
They were tortured from a very young age by their caregivers and sometimes by extended family members or even friends. And when you are suffering severe pain, it is very common for you to leave your body, not literally leave your body, but for your mind to go somewhere else in order for you to cope.
Other experts question whether what are said to be repressed memories are real or imaginary.
The danger of recovering repressed memories is that there's a process involved that is very, very likely to generate fantasy. And even if there were some reality that came out, the reality and the fantasy would be so mixed up one couldn't tell them apart. We don't have memories laid down like tape recordings. We construct our memories from fragments of information, and these memories change over time. They even change depending on the question that's posed.
James Alcock and other skeptics trace the origins of repressed memory to the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud.
And Freud believed that most problems came about because one had repressed some conflicts, repressed some memories of events, and the therapist's job was to try to bring these gently to the surface and allow the person to build up enough strength to be able to deal with them and get rid of them once and for all. You know, that's the old psychoanalytic point of view. It doesn't have any empirical support for it.
The idea that the cause of all life problems and mental illness is attributable to a trauma in childhood is a traditional idea that comes out of Freudian psychoanalytic tradition. It's pure fantasy, it's pre-scientific, it's laughable by modern standards, but it is what informed and organized psychiatry before it became scientific.
Every day on Discovery Science.
If there's no sign of a struggle, nobody's seen or heard anything. There's no suspect, no motive, no body. Where do you begin to look? How do you find the evidence? And how do you make it stick? Crime Night, Thursday from 9 on Discovery.
Advocates of the theory of recovered memory say people can repress horrible experiences to the point that they need counseling to remember them. This movement has stirred enormous controversy and resulted in innocent people being jailed. Are these memories real? Or have they been suggested by therapists? Critics say psychiatrists treating patients claiming repressed memory leaned too heavily on hypnotism and similar techniques. Not only did they trust their patients' memories, they interpreted those memories, sometimes too creatively.
Psychotherapy that involved hypnosis or dream interpretation or guided imagery, imagination exercises, suggestive reading material, all of these things can lead a person to think they have a memory or a series of memories for horrific experiences when in fact those memories aren't real.
Hypnosis is the power of suggestion. Nothing more, nothing less.
Justin Trans, a stage hypnotist, works in Las Vegas. In his act, he has hypnotized thousands. An experience he feels gives him insight into the power of hypnosis and the human psyche.
Everybody is really in hypnosis all the time. Billboards, TV, movies, somebody's always trying to get us to buy something or to do something, or the media wants us to think a certain way. So we're always being bombarded with suggestion. So we're always in a hypnotizable state. The strongest suggestion gets in.
When he's on stage, Trans uses the power of suggestion to encourage members of his audience to participate.
Stand up! Let those hands, people! Those hands going, come on! I'm looking for fun people. People with great imagination, lots of animation.
Justin explains how he reads cues from his audience.
1, 2, 3, on this stage now!
What I'm looking for are people that I can work with easily. People that I can get to stand up when I ask them to stand up, sit down when I ask them to sit down, look left, look right, and just following along with what I want them to do.
Now turn like this real fast and keep turning. More and more. Now go woo, 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 woo. Woo, woo, woo. Turn, 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 turn. Freeze, stop, don't move.
And once I see that I have their attention and their focus, then I work my magic, for the lack of a better word, on them.
Right, lay down, don't think, let go. Let go, sleep, pow, let go, don't think, let go. Loosen up and...
A lot of people come into the show very skeptical. They don't believe it. But when they leave, after seeing their friend or family member or themselves, now they believe that hypnosis is real.
Most scientists deem stage hypnotism to be a gimmick. They say it only works on people vulnerable to dissociation.
Suggestion is an important part of hypnosis because someone who is not suggestible cannot be hypnotized.
When people try to hypnotize someone for the purpose of extracting what they think are buried memories, you end up with a situation where you sometimes suggest to your respondent the information that you think you're looking for. And it leads people to develop false beliefs and false memories.
In a 1983 California case, operators of a daycare center were charged with hundreds of instances of ritual sexual abuse. As in many such episodes, the allegations were shown to be fabricated. During counseling, child therapists convinced the kids to expand upon stories of abuse.
What happened in the McMartin case and other cases like it is it's an example of what is referred to as stimulus priming in psychology. Once you start questioning children, you're in a real dangerous situation because we now know from all sorts of good evidence, experimental evidence, empirical evidence, that children are extremely capable of generating the most incredible stories and make them seem very real and act as though they're very real.
Even so, counselors urge that childhood memories be respected, studied, and when necessary, investigated as crimes.
Many times the people have some memories of what had happened to them as children, but not a full memory because the trauma that the adults are instilling in them, the adults are continuously telling the child, you won't remember this, this isn't happening to you, I'm not doing this.
Those who believe in repressed memories claim such programming is epidemic. They say evil has become a family business.
People were reporting that their families were practicing Satanism, that they had practiced Satanism for many years, many generations in fact, and that they were being handed down and indoctrinated with a set of belief systems that most of us would find extremely irrational and crazy-making.
There are all kinds of reports from the satanic abuse experts of cases where children were killed, and yet neither in the United States nor Canada did law enforcement agencies ever find cases of children who are missing under such circumstances.
Neil Brick's accounts of his childhood fit Walker's description.
I have recollections of being in the basements during the rituals where people were killed, put on crosses. You didn't want to be in the middle of a circle in a satanic ritual. It wasn't, you didn't want to be chosen. You did anything not to be chosen.
Though horrifying, these anecdotes do not persuade skeptics that ritual abuse is real.
There was a time, 30, 40 years ago where people didn't believe children. Suddenly, in the last 20 years, people are starting to say, children don't lie. You should always listen to them. The problem is that it's not a matter of them lying. It's a matter of them generating fantasies, not necessarily pleasant ones.
The suffering is real. The symptoms are real. But the question that you need to ask is, how did the patient get that way? Did they get that way because of prolonged, horrific childhood abuse, maybe satanic ritual abuse? Or did they get that way because of influences on the part of the people who were treating them and influences on the part of the society?
So now we realize that this was all just a large collective hysteria where people fed on each other and came to believe in something and convinced some law enforcement people even that such conspiracies existed.
Whatever their basis in fact, these experiences are genuine to those who claim them, say repressed memory advocates.
Listen carefully and recognize that what you might be hearing is the way a severely traumatized person has put it together. You can actually listen between the lines and figure out the true story, I think, very often.
If repression really existed, and again, I don't believe that it does based on the evidence I've seen, then any one of us, as happy and healthy as we may be, could have been sexually abused, we would have no way of knowing.
I had to survive. I had to go to school. I had to eat. I had to live. So I had to bury it. It actually makes perfect sense in terms of how one could forget something for a long period of time that's so horrible. It makes perfect sense in terms of survival.
They learn what their therapist wants them to say. They learn the theories. They learn the symptoms. And they incorporate this and respond, not necessarily deliberately, not necessarily as a lie, but they're influenced to behave, to respond in this way.
False memories, they can be planted like any little flower.
What if it never really happened? It was just a figment of your imagination.
In some cases, you can remember things that maybe you blocked. It's too painful.
I think it would be very difficult to recover those memories.
As far as blocking it out, I think that can happen.
I do believe you could be hypnotized to remember things.
You can believe them, I don't.
The notion of recovered memory begs a much larger question. How does the human brain work? Until we better understand this 3-pound computer that fits inside our head, we had best proceed with caution. Some people say they can visualize events and objects too far away to be seen by the naked eye. For those who believe in remote viewing, the mind is a sending and receiving unit, a compact, complex mechanism capable of reaching out, even involuntarily, to deliver and collect information.
Remote viewing is the act of being able to describe anything, anytime, any place using just your mind and pen and paper.
Prudence Calabresi is in the business of remote viewing. Calabresi and her associates have been called upon to find hidden money, fugitive financiers, and missing persons.
Remote viewing can be used to target literally anything. You can look at locations and describe the people and events and structures there. You can use remote viewing to describe the complete psychological makeup of a person. Anything is open to remote viewing.
Remote viewing is an outgrowth of older methods of telepathic communication and ESP, both popular during the 19th century. Around the world, many people believed that they could send and receive messages solely through the power of their mind. Today's remote viewers feel they can visualize the present and foretell the future. They say the mind is the ultimate communication tool.
Remote viewing itself is very structured and fairly scientific. It involves particular blinding protocols, and that's the definition of remote viewing. Those particular protocols put on this intuitive psychic kind of activity.
The scientific community of today does not believe that telepathic communication exists.
I think that these experiences come about through perfectly normal means, that people are not getting information via telepathy, even though they come to have an experience which makes them think that they have. The fact is that over the last 125 years at least, all these efforts, no matter how careful they've been, have failed to produce a single replicable demonstration of these abilities.
The reason these studies come up short, scientists say, has to do with the limits of the brain's ability to generate energy.
What we know about the brain is that the energy that's emitted from the brain, by the time you get within a few centimeters of the skull, there's nothing there to pick up. We have to use unbelievably powerful amplification tools to record brain waves from the skull because of the very low energy.
We don't know if different objects that you're viewing actually give off some kind of a force or energy field and the remote viewer is reading that field, or if the remote viewer truly is using their mind to literally travel to the place to describe what's there.
Remote viewing got a serious hearing from the U.S. government during the latter days of the Cold War. Intent on penetrating the USSR, military intelligence officials were open to any possibility. They enlisted the aid of Russell Targ of the Stanford Research Institute.
We had demonstrated that it's possible for a person sitting in the laboratory to describe and experience what's going on in a distant place. We then took those data to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Targ's institute handles psychic espionage for the Central Intelligence Agency and other government entities. Targ, a laser physicist, headed Project Stargate. Because he led those who sought to wage the Cold War with their minds, Targ became known as the father of remote viewing.
The government would come to us in applications cases and say, here's some geographical coordinates, latitude and longitude, what does it look like and what's happening at that distant place. Part of the remote viewing that we see in the laboratory is a mind-to-mind connection between a person at a distant site and the psychic in the laboratory. But the images that are picked up are generally not crystal clear.
Skeptics give psychic warriors an A for optimism, but an F for results. They say the concept was too much of a mental stretch.
The original idea was that if people have these powers, wouldn't it be great to be able to use them as a military tool? And so some of the projects involved people trying to discover what was going on in the Soviet Union by means of extrasensory perception.
Alcock requires an effort that set remote viewers to the task of blowing up Russian armored vehicles by staring at a photo of a tank. When the Soviets learned of the scheme, they put their own destructive thinkers to work.
If one mind's trying to blow up a tank and the other mind's trying to prevent it, I don't know what would happen. It becomes rather fanciful at that point.
Targ says he and his colleagues had many successes. One particular attempt had great results.
This illustration was one of the trials that we did for the CIA in the early part of our program, where we were given geographical coordinates, latitude and longitude, of some place in the Soviet Union. This is the drawing made to put on paper his mental impressions of what was going on at the geographical coordinates that the CIA gave us. On this side, we have a blow-up of the crane at that site shown in satellite photography.
To explain how remote viewing works, Targ invokes the principle of non-locality, a term used in physics for links between things that seem to be separated. Researchers have conducted tests of the non-locality principle and have shown that polarization in one photon may appear in another photon far from the original.
Both the photons connection and our psychic connections are manifestations of the fact we live in an interconnected world.
Physicists stress that the theory of non-locality is in relation to subatomic particles traveling near the speed of light, and that there is no scientific evidence that they have any relationship to remote viewing or telepathy.
It's interesting, but it's irrelevant to the question of whether there has been demonstration that there is extrasensory perception, which can be demonstrated independent of any theory if it exists.
Ray Hyman finds fault with claims that remote viewing has proven itself. He observes scientists can't consistently reproduce the results of remote viewers.
But what you look for is some reliable ability of this person who's doing this to do it under different circumstances. No matter how controlled it is, if you're using the power of your mind, it shouldn't matter. All of that material has no value in science, because either it was anecdotal or it was, again, something that occurred once and couldn't be repeated.
In 1995, the government shut down Project Stargate.
The reason replication is very, very important, especially in ESP type of phenomena. Remember, the burden of proof, see, I'm being asked all the time is, how do I explain away their results? Really, this is the wrong question. The question is, for them, the burden of proof is on their, on a claimant. If their claims of remote viewing were right, it would really be a revolution in science.
Take a closer look at modern technology. If you can think the next step, you can make the next leap. Science Night, tomorrow from 9 on Discovery.
Every day on Discovery Science.
Its advocates describe remote viewing as a form of mental telepathy. People who claim this sixth sense say they can visualize what goes on a world away. U.S. government officials like the idea so much they experimented with the technique during the Cold War. Others call the concept far-fetched. Remote viewing, valid technique or merely mind games? Going into the 21st century, one of the leading proponents of remote viewing is Prudence Calabrese, founder of Transdimensional Systems. Calabresi's firm specializes in finding lost persons and locating business assets. Calabrese sees remote viewing as a basic human tool.
Everybody's had those moments where they know someone is staring at them and they turn around and that person is looking at them. Or you know that someone's going to call you on the phone, or you have a sense of a friend. You haven't thought of your friend in a while, and the phone rings and it's your friend. Everybody has these moments every single day.
The war on terror extends to remote viewing. The FBI has contracted with Calabrese. Transdimensional's method is simple. Once a target is chosen, a viewer focuses on that subject.
When a viewer is in the middle of a session, they rely on their intuition primarily. They listen to their body and to their mind for the subtle pieces of data that come to the surface. Some of these pieces of the data may be energetics, or they may be colors or tastes or textures or actual thoughts of individuals at the site of the target.
Experts assert these claims run counter to the science we live by.
In these studies of remote viewing and so forth, the more carefully controlled it is, the less likely it is that you find the effect. And so the problem with parapsychology is not only does it go against so much of what is very, very strongly supported science. So that some of the strongly supported science must be wrong if the parapsychological notions are right.
Calabrese points to her associations with government and other reputable clients as evidence that remote viewing is here to stay and gaining credibility all the time.
Remote viewing will eventually be taught in grade school, and it'll be a technique that children learn. They'll learn to honor their own intuition and to use it very closely and to develop it as they grow. And we feel that eventually we will be a telepathic society.
I mean, science developed as a way to help protect us from self-delusion. We can explain all the experiences that people have, such as telepathy and so forth, not in terms of some strange power that goes beyond science, but rather in terms of the way our own quite wonderful minds work, and they work sometimes without us completely understanding how they work.
I do believe in ESP.
I think there is a certain amount of truth in it.
ESP? I don't think that it really works.
I really don't believe in that psychic phenomenon. When someone does have an ability, I think it's few and far between that people don't want to believe it.
Could be that people can read minds.
I'm not so sure there's validity to it.
I think some people have it and some people don't. It's just a gift.
Scientific testing has failed to prove that remote viewing is a valid way to acquire information or influence events. After decades of experience, including official use by the federal government, the evidence just isn't there. It's natural to feel an attraction to concepts like remote viewing, repressed memory, subliminal communication, and certain uses of hypnotism. But as remarkable as the brain can be, we can't trust it entirely, as the data show. We'll be back soon with a scientific perspective on extraordinary phenomena. For the Critical Eye, I'm William B. Davis.